didn't commit first-degree murder. There was no premeditated anything. I realize it does not bring her back, and it doesn't.
Number 1. Michael Jace. He built a career playing the roles of officers, protectors, and men the public trusted. But behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding. To many viewers, Michael Jace was just another familiar face on television, someone who blended into police dramas and crime shows without making headlines. But in 2014, the world would learn that the darkest scenes in his life weren't scripted. Before his name became tied to a courtroom instead of a casting sheet, Michael Jace was best known for his recurring role as Officer Julian Lowe on the television series The Shield. He played a quiet, conflicted patrolman, the kind of character who wrestled with inner turmoil. Off-screen, people described him as soft-spoken, polite, and committed to his family. Born in Paterson, New Jersey, and later carving out a steady, if modest, acting career, he didn't live with celebrity status, but he had enough recognition to be seen as successful. He married April Lawn, a schoolteacher and mother of 2, and together they were seen as a stable family trying to balance work and parenting in Los Angeles. Neighbors recalled them as ordinary, quiet, and involved in their children's routines. No one imagined what was building behind closed doors. Financial pressures were quietly mounting. By the early 2000s, Jace was facing debt, late mortgage payments, and the fading of consistent acting work. Public filings later revealed that he had declared bankruptcy in 2011. Those closest to him said this period strained their marriage, and friends noticed tension. April, focused on her career and raising their sons, seemed to be trying to keep the household stable. From the outside, there were no police reports, no major scandals, no public blow-ups. But those small cracks were widening in ways few recognized. On the evening of May 19th, 2014, everything reached its breaking point. That night, Michael Jace called 911 from their home in the Hyde Park area of Los Angeles. His voice was strangely calm as he told the dispatcher that he had killed his wife. The couple's 2 young sons were inside the home during the incident. What happened in those minutes before the call became the center of a case that shocked fans and those who once worked with him. It wasn't a sudden confrontation between strangers. It was personal, direct, and devastating. When police arrived at the house, April was found injured, and despite emergency efforts, she died at the scene. The children were unharmed physically, but had witnessed the immediate aftermath. Officers detained Jace without resistance. He did not flee, hide, or attempt to create a false story. Instead, he spoke in a way that made. Investigators believe the act had been driven by a moment of explosive anger rather than a calculated plan, though the severity of the crime meant his intentions would be scrutinized in court. The investigation revealed a timeline that pointed to growing marital conflict. April had reportedly been planning changes in their relationship that Jace did not want. Financial issues were ongoing, and some relatives claimed that arguments over custody and separation were becoming more frequent. Detectives interviewed friends, co-workers, and neighbors, collecting details about the couple's final weeks. The presence of the children added urgency to the case, as authorities sought to understand what exactly they witnessed and how much they heard. Prosecutors filed charges quickly. In June 2014, Jace was formally charged with killing his wife. The case drew media attention because of his acting background and the irony of his most recognized role being a law enforcement officer. Court documents introduced phone records, financial stress, and statements from witnesses familiar with the couple's strain. The prosecution argued that anger and control fueled the incident. The defense did not dispute responsibility, but aimed to lessen the severity of the charge by portraying the act as unplanned and emotionally driven. The trial began in May 2016 in Los Angeles County Superior Court. During testimony, jurors heard the 911 call, reviewed forensic evidence, and learned that the children had been in the home at the time. Prosecutors emphasized that the act could not be dismissed as a momentary lapse, pointing out that Jace himself made the call and acknowledged what he had done. The defense tried to suggest the absence of premeditation, but the jury focused on the outcome rather than intent. After deliberations, the jury found him guilty of second-degree killing. The conviction reflected a finding that he acted intentionally, even if not with long-term planning. In June 2016, he was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. The sentence accounted for both the severity of the act and the impact on the children who were present during the incident. He was taken into custody and has remained incarcerated since. Today, he is serving his sentence in California. His acting career ended instantly after his arrest, and he has kept a low public profile behind bars. His children were placed with relatives, and April's family became their primary support system. There have been no widely reported appeals or attempts to revisit the conviction in recent years. He will be eligible for parole when he is in his 80s, but there is no indication that freedom is likely. Number 2, Danny Masterson. He spent years playing the laid-back, wisecracking guy audiences thought they knew, but the life he lived off camera would eventually lead to one of the most high-profile convictions in Hollywood history. For a long time, Danny Masterson was just another familiar face from a hit sitcom, someone viewers associated with comedy, nostalgia, and the early 2000s. No one imagined that decades later, his name would be tied not to television, but to a courtroom and a sentence measured in decades. Before legal trouble overtook his life, Danny Masterson was best known for his role as Stephen Hyde on That 70s Show, one of the most popular sitcoms of its era. Born in New York and raised in a family with ties to both entertainment and the Church of Scientology, he began working young, first as a child model and then as a television and film actor. By his 20s, he had national recognition, a strong fan base, and steady income from television work. He appeared confident, socially connected, and often portrayed as a charismatic personality. Behind the scenes, he was involved heavily in Scientology circles, which shaped much of his personal and professional life. To outside observers, his world seemed controlled and comfortable, with a long-term relationship, a home in Los Angeles, and a reputation that appeared stable. But allegations began to surface quietly in the early 2000s and didn't gain traction until years later. Several women came forward independently, telling investigators that they had been harmed by Masterson in separate incidents that dated back to the early 2000s. Each account described scenarios involving trust, familiarity, and situations where victims later claimed they were disoriented or unable to react. These initial complaints did not immediately lead to charges, and for a long time the cases remained buried under non-disclosure agreements, internal reports, and silence. In 2017, during a larger wave of industry exposure, law enforcement reopened investigations. The Los Angeles Police Department and the District Attorney's Office began interviewing multiple accusers whose stories showed notable similarities. Reports surfaced that some women had previously tried to speak out but were pressured into silence or faced intimidation. As detectives gathered more testimony, the tone of the case shifted from rumor to formal review. For many, this was the first time Masterson's private life was publicly questioned. By June 2020, prosecutors filed 3 counts against him based on separate incidents that occurred between 2001 and 2003. Each charge involved a woman who personally knew Masterson and stated that he had taken advantage of circumstances where they were vulnerable. The legal focus was on establishing a pattern of behavior, not a single moment. Masterson denied the accusations through his attorneys and maintained that all encounters were consensual. His legal team argued that time had passed, evidence was limited, and motivations of accusers were questionable. But the prosecution emphasized consistency in testimony, the credibility of witnesses, and accounts that had been documented years earlier. The first trial began in late 2022, drawing national media coverage and intense public interest. Jurors heard testimony from multiple women who described accounts that were emotionally detailed, but without sensational language. Prosecutors highlighted similarities in how each woman described losing awareness or control, followed by distress and fear afterward. The defense challenged memory, intent, and the reliability of recollections from events that happened nearly 2 decades before. That initial trial ended in a mistrial because the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision. A retrial was scheduled in 2023 with a more streamlined case and additional clarity on evidence allowed in court. This time, the jury heard from the same accusers, but with tighter legal framing. Prosecutors reiterated that the incidents involved someone who used trust and isolation to exert control. The defense again denied any wrongdoing, pointing to former relationships and questioning witness accuracy. But unlike the first trial, jurors were more aligned in how they interpreted the testimony and supporting statements. In May 2023, the jury reached a verdict. Danny Masterson was convicted on 2 of the 3 counts brought against him. The third count ended in another deadlock. The conviction marked one of the most prominent cases of an actor found guilty in connection with long-standing accusations from the early 2000s. The courtroom filled with reporters and family members as the decision was read. In September 2023, sentencing took place in Los Angeles. The judge imposed a term of 30 years to life in prison, 15 years for each count, served consecutively. Masterson, who was 47 at the time, was taken into custody immediately. He is currently serving his sentence in a California state facility. His legal team has filed notices of intent to appeal, claiming errors in procedure and evidence handling, but for now, the conviction stands. Appeals in such cases can take years and rarely overturn sentences without substantial new developments. His career ended the moment charges were filed. Streaming services pulled his shows, projects were canceled, and even his previous roles became overshadowed by the case. Former colleagues largely stayed silent or released brief statements expressing sympathy for those who testified. His association with Scientology drew attention as well, with some accusers claiming they were discouraged from reporting what happened. The organization denied involvement in any cover-up, but the claims became part of public discussion surrounding the trial. For those who watched him growing up on television, the contrast between his screen persona and his conviction created a difficult disconnect. It raised questions about how well people really know public figures and how long serious allegations can remain unaddressed. Imagine thinking someone's biggest controversy involved a canceled show or a career slump, only to learn that the truth involved a courtroom, multiple accusers, and decades-long consequences. Now, Danny Masterson lives far from the attention that once came with fame. His name is no longer linked to entertainment, but to a sentence measured not in episodes or contracts, but in years behind prison walls. The women who came forward faced cross-examination, disbelief, and years of waiting before a verdict arrived. And for the public, his case became one more reminder that what happens off camera can remain hidden for years, until it no longer can. Number 3. Johnny Lewis. He once moved easily through the world of Hollywood, appearing in popular shows and building a steady acting resume, but in 2012, his life spiraled in a way few could have predicted. Johnny Lewis became known not for a breakout role or a scandalous tabloid story, but for a case so shocking that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand how it unfolded. Johnny K. Lewis was born in Los Angeles in 1983 and raised in a creative, closely knit family. His parents were involved in the entertainment and spiritual communities, and he grew up in an environment that encouraged expression and ambition. His early introduction to acting landed him roles in commercials and TV guest spots by his teenage years. He appeared in shows like Drake and Josh, Malcolm in the Middle, and The O.C., gradually building a solid career. By his mid-20s, his most recognized role came on the hit series Sons of Anarchy, where he played Kip Half-Sack Epps, a young biker prospect struggling to fit into a violent world. His character was written out of the show in 2009, and while many thought he would continue rising, cracks were already forming behind the scenes. Off-screen, his life grew more chaotic. Friends and acquaintances later said he had changed dramatically in the years leading up to 2012. He suffered a serious motorcycle accident around 2011, which some believed affected his behavior, judgment, and emotional stability. There were reports of trouble managing his personal life, including a breakup and a short-lived relationship that resulted in the birth of his daughter. Custody disagreements followed, and people close to him said these pressures weighed heavily. Around the same time, he faced several arrests involving trespassing, fighting, and property damage. Although those charges were relatively minor, the pattern pointed to growing instability. By late 2011 and early 2012, his behavior became more erratic. Court documents and police reports documented incidents in which he broke into a home, assaulted a man, and damaged property. He was sent to a treatment facility and a jail-based program, but he was eventually released. Some who saw him around that time said he appeared disoriented and unwell. Others said he seemed distant, unfocused, and unpredictable, as though something inside him had shifted in a way no one fully understood. Then came the night of September 26, 2012. Around 10:40 p.m., neighbors in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles heard screams coming from a home where Lewis had been renting a room. The house belonged to 81-year-old Catherine Davis, a well-liked landlord known for renting rooms to actors and artists. When officers responded to calls of a disturbance, what they found was a scene that stunned them. Catherine Davis had been attacked inside her home, and her injuries were fatal. Investigators later confirmed that her dog had been harmed as well. While authorities were still responding to the initial scene, witnesses reported seeing a man, later identified as Lewis, outside the house, acting erratically. Moments later, he fell or jumped from the home's roof or terrace onto the driveway below. Paramedics determined he had died at the scene. He was 28 years old. The circumstances were so sudden and violent that detectives began piecing together the timeline immediately. Investigators determined that Johnny Lewis was the only suspect. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication of additional intruders, and evidence in the home connected him to the scene. Although toxicology tests were conducted to understand his state of mind at the time, the results did not show common substances that could explain his behavior. Some speculated about undiagnosed mental illness or damage from his head injury, but no definitive cause was confirmed publicly. Because he died during the incident, there was no trial and no opportunity for testimony or cross-examination. The legal process centered instead on confirming facts, closing the investigation, and notifying families. Law enforcement concluded that he was responsible for the attack on Catherine Davis and the death that followed. His passing meant the case would not proceed through the courts, leaving grieving relatives and the community to accept a closed file without a traditional prosecution. The aftermath raised questions that still linger. People who once worked with him struggled to reconcile the actor they knew with the events of that night. Friends called the situation tragic on all sides, pointing to his apparent decline and the unanswered questions about his mental health. Catherine Davis was remembered as a kind landlord and a welcoming figure in the artistic community. Her death brought an outpouring of support from neighbors and former tenants who had lived in her historic home over the years. There was also a quiet reflection on how someone's life can unravel so quickly and so completely. Imagine watching someone go from recognizable roles and industry promise to a series of arrests, behavioral changes, and instability that culminates in irreversible harm. It left many wondering whether early intervention might have changed the outcome, or if warning signs had simply gone unnoticed. Today, Johnny Lewis's name is remembered not for the roles he played, but for the night everything ended in violence and confusion. His career stopped abruptly, his life ended instantly, and a respected woman lost hers in the process. There were no appeals, no statements from the accused, and no verdict read in court. Just a closed investigation and two families forever altered. The story of Johnny Lewis sits at the intersection of talent, decline, and tragedy. It leaves behind a difficult question. When someone's life begins to fracture in ways the public can't see, how often does help come too late, or not at all? Number 4. Skylar Deleon. He once appeared on television as a child, blending easily into the world of family entertainment. But the path his life took would lead far from sound stages and cameras. Skylar Deleon may have had only a brief brush with acting, but his crimes would make his name far more infamous than his time in the spotlight ever could. What began as the life of a former kid actor spiraled into deception, desperation, and a level of cruelty that stunned both investigators and the public. Skylar Julius Deleon was born John Julius Jacobson Jr. in 1979 in California. As a child, he landed small roles in commercials and had a minor appearance in the early 1990s series Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. For a brief time, it looked like he might grow into a working actor, but as he grew older, his career faded, and he drifted away from Hollywood entirely. He joined the Marines as a young adult, but was discharged after going absent without leave. Without stable work or discipline, he began sliding into cycles of debt and instability. He later married a woman named Jennifer, and they had a daughter together. From the outside, they appeared to be trying to build a family, but behind that image, financial pressure mounted. Friends and acquaintances would testify that he was constantly looking for money and willing to manipulate others to get it. By the early 2000s, Deleon had already faced legal trouble. In 2003, he was convicted of armed burglary after participating in a scheme to steal from a California business. But the most disturbing events were still ahead. That same year, he and his wife reportedly began planning ways to gain money quickly, and they turned their attention to people who had something valuable they could take. In 2004, Deleon arranged to meet Tom and Jackie Hawks, a retired couple in their 50s who were selling their yacht, the Well-Deserved. The Hawks had saved and planned for years to enjoy life at sea, only deciding to sell the boat to move closer to family and prepare for the arrival of a grandchild. They listed the yacht for sale in Newport Beach, and Deleon contacted them, presenting himself as a buyer who wanted to purchase it with his wife. He claimed he had the funds and wanted to test the vessel on the water before finalizing the deal. The couple agreed and scheduled a meeting. Tom and Jackie were experienced and cautious, but they saw no immediate red flags. On November 15, 2004, they met Deleon at the harbor. He didn't come alone. He brought along two accomplices, Alonzo McChain and John F. Kennedy, unrelated to the political family. Deleon's wife Jennifer also played a role in setting up the meeting and pretending to review the contract. Once on board and out at sea, the tone changed. Investigators later reconstructed the events based on testimony from one of the accomplices, revealing how the Hawkses were overpowered and forced to sign documents transferring ownership of the yacht and granting power over their assets. The couple was bound and eventually forced off the boat alive, into the water, while weighted down so they could not resurface. They never returned home, and their bodies were never found. Friends and relatives of the Hawkses grew suspicious almost immediately when they couldn't reach them. The couple's SUV was discovered abandoned in Mexico, staged to look as though they had left by choice. Their bank accounts began to show unauthorized activity. Within days, law enforcement was investigating, and Deleon quickly became a person of interest. Investigators uncovered inconsistencies in his story and tracked financial transactions linked to the couple's assets. When police interviewed McChain, the accomplice eventually confessed and provided details that confirmed the killings at sea. Deleon was arrested in late 2004 and charged with 2 counts of first-degree killing with special circumstances. Prosecutors argued that the crimes were financially motivated and carefully planned. They presented evidence of forged signatures, fraudulent transfers, and communication between Deleon and his accomplices before and after the killings. Jennifer Deleon was also charged, accused of helping plan the attack and assisting in covering up the crime. The brutality of throwing the couple overboard while alive added a level of horror that made the case stand out nationally. During pretrial proceedings, investigators also tied Deleon to another killing, that of a man named John Jarvie, who had been found dead in Mexico in 2003. Jarvie had trusted Deleon with travel plans, but was instead taken across the border and killed for his money. The additional connection deepened the perception that Deleon was not acting out of desperation alone, but was willing to eliminate people entirely to obtain what he wanted. The trial began in 2008 in Orange County. The prosecution described how Deleon targeted the Hawkses because they were older, financially comfortable, and in possession of a valuable asset. They painted him as manipulative and calculating, using deception to gain trust before violently taking control. His defense attempted to minimize his role and shift blame to others, but the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies of his accomplices, the trail of forged documents, and the financial motives formed a complete picture. In October 2008, the jury convicted him of the killings of Tom and Jackie Hawks, with special circumstances for financial gain. During the penalty phase, the jury recommended the death sentence. In April 2009, a judge formally sentenced Skylar Deleon to death. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he remains on death row. His wife Jennifer was convicted separately and received a life sentence without parole. Number 5, Mark Salling. He was once part of a television phenomenon that celebrated talent, fame, and rising success, but off-screen, a much darker reality was taking shape. Mark Salling went from starring in one of the most popular shows of its time to becoming the center of a case that shocked fans, former colleagues, and the entertainment industry. What emerged in the final years of his life overshadowed everything he had built, leaving a legacy defined not by performance, but by criminal conviction. Mark Wayne Salling was born in Dallas, Texas, in 1982. He grew up in a household that valued both education and creativity. Music became a major part of his identity from an early age. He played guitar, wrote songs, and even taught music lessons to earn money. Seeking acting opportunities, he moved to Los Angeles in his late teens. Before fame, he landed small roles in low-budget films and made appearances in independent projects, but for years, his career struggled to gain momentum. That changed in 2009 when he was cast as Noah Puckerman on the television series Glee. The show became a global hit, and his character, a mohawked, rebellious high school football player turned Glee Club member, was immediately recognizable. The series launched him into fame, earning him a fan base and steady income. He released music, appeared at award shows, and built an image as a charismatic celebrity with a bad boy persona that appealed to young audiences. To most viewers, he was just another face from a successful show. Few had reason to believe that something far more troubling was happening out of sight. After Glee ended, his career slowed. Roles became harder to find, and his public appearances decreased. In 2015, that relative quiet was shattered. That year, federal investigators executed a search warrant at his Los Angeles home after receiving a tip. During the search, agents seized electronic devices that contained thousands of illegal images involving minors. The volume alone stunned authorities. The material had been downloaded and saved over time, indicating deliberate possession rather than a single impulsive act. In December 2015, he was arrested and charged in federal court. News of the charges went public immediately, and the entertainment world reacted with disbelief. His attorney initially denied the allegations, but as investigators cataloged the digital evidence, the strength of the case became undeniable. Prosecutors stated that more than 50,000 images and videos were recovered from his personal devices. Friends and colleagues from the show distanced themselves, and he was dropped from a film he had been cast in. His attempt to retreat from public scrutiny did little to stop the story from spreading. In 2017, after negotiations with prosecutors, he entered a guilty plea in federal court to one felony count of possessing illegal content involving minors. The plea agreement included a recommendation that he serve several years in federal prison, register as an offender, and remain on supervised release after his sentence. At the time of the plea, the presiding judge warned that the final sentence was not guaranteed and could change at the formal hearing. It was expected that he would receive between 4 and 7 years, along with strict lifetime restrictions on internet access and contact with minors. As his sentencing date approached in early 2018, he was living with family and wearing a monitoring device. He faced financial penalties as well, including restitution payments to unidentified individuals connected to the materials found. He also underwent psychiatric evaluations and was subject to travel limits. Those who had once known him professionally largely stayed silent, offering no public defense or support. On January 30th, 2018, before sentencing could take place, Mark Salling was found dead near a riverbed in Los Angeles. Authorities determined that he had died by suicide. He was 35 years old. His death closed the criminal case, ending any formal sentencing process. The court dismissed the pending hearing due to his passing, and the conviction remained in place because he had already entered a guilty plea. In the aftermath, the public response was divided. Many focused on the harm caused by his actions, recognizing the scale of the crime and the seriousness of the evidence found. Others pointed to his downfall as a cautionary story about fame obscuring private wrongdoing. His former castmates offered limited statements, acknowledging the tragedy but not defending his conduct. The entertainment industry moved on quickly, distancing itself from both his career and legacy. To this day, his conviction stands as one of the most serious criminal cases involving a television actor from that era. The combination of his role on a youth-centered show and the nature of the charges intensified public reaction. The volume of illegal material found on his devices left little ambiguity, and his legal responsibility was firmly established in court. Imagine someone who once appeared on magazine covers, sang to millions of viewers, and posed for red carpet photos, later standing in a federal courtroom pleading guilty to crimes that contradicted the very image that made him famous. His story is not one of mystery or unresolved questions, but one of deliberate actions that led to a legal and personal collapse from which there was no recovery. Mark Salling's case became a reminder that fame does not shield wrongdoing from exposure. His death did not erase the conviction or the consequences of what he was found guilty of possessing. For those who once watched him on screen, the contrast between the character they knew and the life he led in private became impossible to ignore. In the end, his name is remembered not for the roles he played, but for the crimes that ended his career and life before a judge could deliver the final sentence. In later years, Deleon announced a desire to transition and identified as female, but this did not alter his legal status or the outcome of his sentence. The yacht, the staged documents, and the abandonment of the victims in the ocean became the lasting symbols of the crime. Without a trial focused on appeals or renewed claims of innocence, the case largely faded from headlines, though it is occasionally revisited in documentaries and crime programs. The story of Skylar Deleon is one of transformation, but not the kind found in Hollywood scripts. Imagine someone who once stood in front of cameras pretending to be a character, only to later orchestrate acts that ended the lives of people who had trusted him. The Hawks family never saw a courtroom battle over responsibility, only sentencing and the quiet acknowledgement that their loved ones were gone forever. And in the end, the actions of a man who once tried to make a name in television became known not for entertainment, but for calculated violence on open water. Number 6, Stephen Collins. For years, he was seen as the face of calm authority, the kind of actor who played fathers, ministers, and mentors with an ease that made audiences trust him. Stephen Collins built a long career on roles that projected safety and moral guidance. But in 2014, that image collapsed almost overnight when disturbing revelations emerged and turned public admiration into outrage. Stephen Weaver Collins was born in Iowa in 1947 and raised in New York. He came from a well-educated family and pursued acting after attending Amherst College. His early work included appearances on Broadway and supporting roles on television. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he developed a reputation for being reliable, composed, and well-suited to playing professionals or parental figures. His most recognizable role came in 1996 when he was cast as Reverend Eric Camden on the long-running television show Seventh Heaven. The drama focused on a minister and his family navigating everyday life, and it became one of the most popular family-oriented programs on television, especially among younger viewers and parents. Collins played the moral center of the show, a soft-spoken figure who counseled children and guided his community. For over a decade, the role defined his public identity. He continued to appear in movies and guest roles, but Seventh Heaven made him a familiar face across households. Off-screen, he married actress Faye Grant in 1985, and the two had a daughter together. They lived in Los Angeles and, for many years, seemed to maintain a stable private life. That image changed as their marriage began to deteriorate in the early 2000s. In 2012, Grant filed for divorce after nearly 3 decades together. What followed would bring out allegations that had never before reached the public. During the divorce proceedings, Grant provided a secret audio recording of a therapy session she and Collins had attended years earlier. On that recording, Collins admitted to inappropriate conduct involving minors and incidents that occurred decades earlier. The audio was turned over to investigators, and in 2014, it was leaked to the media, triggering immediate national reaction. Within hours, entertainment outlets, news networks, and social media exploded with coverage. Authorities in Los Angeles and New York opened investigations into the incidents he described on the tape. The recorded admissions referenced 3 victims in separate cases dating back to the 1970s and 1980s. While the investigations were serious, many of the alleged acts fell outside the statute of limitations, meaning too much time had passed for criminal charges to be filed. Detectives still interviewed potential victims and examined old case files, but no formal charges resulted. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry severed ties with him almost instantly. Reruns of Seventh Heaven were pulled from multiple networks. He was removed from upcoming projects, and his talent agency dropped him. His public appearances stopped. Friends and former co-stars largely avoided commenting or expressed shock and disappointment without defending him. In December 2014, Collins gave a written statement to a major publication confirming that the recorded admissions were accurate. He acknowledged inappropriate behavior involving 3 minors in the past and expressed regret. His statement marked the first time he addressed the situation publicly, and he did not contest the authenticity of the tape. Even without a criminal trial, his acknowledgement cemented public perception. Legal analysts noted that although he could not be prosecuted for most or all of the conduct due to expired statutes, civil claims remained possible if victims chose to pursue them. The divorce with Faye Grant moved forward, and the court finalized the separation in 2015. Financial settlements and division of property were handled privately, with his career earnings no longer relevant to future projects. Collins withdrew from public life entirely afterward. There were no attempts at a comeback, no appearances at conventions or interviews, and no signs of new acting endeavors. His professional representation vanished, and his online presence went quiet. He has remained largely out of view, living a private life without ongoing legal cases. The investigations into his conduct formally closed with no charges due to time constraints, but law enforcement confirmed that they had reviewed testimonies and evidence thoroughly. For the victims involved, the outcome depended more on acknowledgement than trial. Imagine watching someone for over a decade portray a devoted father and spiritual advisor, only to learn years later that his past actions contradicted the morals he acted out on screen. Fans of Seventh Heaven described feeling betrayed, as though the persona they trusted had been hiding behind a mask. His work vanished from syndication, and his name became tied to admission of wrongdoing rather than Hollywood acclaim. Today, Stephen Collins lives removed from the industry that once made him widely known. No major network broadcasts his past shows, and studios have distanced themselves from his work. His legacy is no longer about the characters he played, but about what he acknowledged in his own words. The absence of a criminal sentence did not change the public's verdict, nor did it restore the image he built across decades. In the end, his case stands as a stark example of how a person can live under the spotlight for years while carrying something no role or reputation can conceal forever. His silent sense speaks loudly, because once the truth surfaced, nothing more he could say would erase what people already heard in his own voice. Number 7. Phil Spector. For decades, he was hailed as a visionary, a producer who reshaped modern music and built a legacy that seemed untouchable. But behind that legacy was a volatile private life marked by intimidation, weapons, and a pattern of disturbing behavior. Phil Spector's name, once associated with legendary artists and innovation, would ultimately become linked to a conviction that erased any admiration his career once commanded. Harvey Philip Spector was born in the Bronx in 1939 and raised in a difficult household. His father died when he was young, and his family later relocated to Los Angeles. As a teenager, he developed a fascination with music and quickly turned talent into opportunity. In 1958, he co-founded the Teddy Bears and wrote "To Know Him Is to Love Him," a song inspired by his father's gravestone inscription. It became a #1 hit while he was still in high school. By his 20s, he had stepped away from performing to focus on producing. In the 1960s, Spector became one of the most powerful and influential figures in the music world. He created the Wall of Sound, a layered recording technique that transformed artists like the Ronettes, the Crystals, and the Righteous Brothers. Later, he worked with major acts, including the Beatles and John Lennon. His fame, wealth, and artistic influence made him an industry giant. But privately, those who worked with him saw a different side: intense, controlling, and volatile. Over time, stories emerged about his temper and fixation with firearms. Multiple women and colleagues recounted experiences where he displayed aggressive behavior and used guns to threaten or intimidate. Though these accounts circulated for years, they rarely led to legal consequences. Spector lived in a sprawling mansion in Alhambra, California, where he often entertained guests late into the night. Despite his stature, his reputation in Hollywood had faded by the late 1990s, and he was seen as reclusive, eccentric, and difficult to work with. On February 3, 2003, everything changed. That night, actress and model Lana Clarkson was working at the House of Blues in West Hollywood, where she met Spector and later accompanied him to his home. Clarkson, known for roles in film and television throughout the 1980s and 1990s, was described as warm, sharp, and professional. The two arrived at his property in the early morning hours. What happened inside would become the center of one of the most high-profile criminal cases involving a figure from the entertainment industry. Shortly after arriving, a driver waiting outside heard a loud sound. Moments later, Spector reportedly exited the house and said words that suggested something terrible had happened inside. When law enforcement responded, they found Lana Clarkson inside the foyer with a gunshot wound. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Spector was arrested and released on bail while investigators gathered evidence. He claimed the death was an accident and insisted she had caused it herself. Prosecutors took a different view. They interviewed past acquaintances who described incidents where he had threatened women with firearms when they tried to leave his home. Clarkson's friends and family rejected the idea that she would have harmed herself. Forensic experts built a narrative in which Spector's handling of the weapon, combined with his history, suggested responsibility. The first trial began in 2007 in Los Angeles. It was highly publicized, with witnesses describing his unpredictable behavior and a pattern of blocking women from leaving after private gatherings. However, after months of testimony, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in a mistrial. A retrial proceeded in 2008 with a streamlined case and additional testimony from expert witnesses. Prosecutors emphasized a consistent pattern. Spector would invite women to his home and react with aggression if they tried to leave. They used prior accounts not as unrelated allegations, but as evidence of behavior that placed Clarkson at risk that night. The defense highlighted the lack of direct eyewitnesses and argued that no one truly knew what happened inside the house in those final moments. In April 2009, the jury returned a guilty verdict on one count of second-degree killing. Spector, then nearing 70, was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. He was ordered to serve a mandatory minimum of 15 years before becoming eligible for parole. He was also required to pay restitution to Clarkson's family. He began serving his sentence at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton. As years passed, his health declined, and public memory of his musical accomplishments became overshadowed by the conviction. His second wife divorced him while he was incarcerated, and appeals filed on his behalf were unsuccessful. He remained in custody, largely out of public sight. On January 16, 2021, Phil Spector died in prison at the age of 81. His death marked the end of a life that had once been celebrated for artistry, but concluded under the weight of a court verdict and the loss of a woman whose life ended in his home. Imagine someone credited with shaping an entire era of music, someone whose influence reached world-famous artists and changed how songs were recorded and heard. Then imagine that same person standing in a courtroom as prosecutors detail a history of fear and coercion. His story shows how talent and fame can hide deep problems for years, until one irreversible moment brings the truth into full view. Phil Spector is no longer remembered first as a producer, but as a man convicted of killing Lana Clarkson. The mansion that once hosted musicians, parties, and industry legends became a crime scene, and the sound that defined his fame was replaced by silence in a courtroom where even his legacy could not protect him from accountability. Number 8, Robert Blake. For most of his life, he was known as a seasoned character actor, a man who had worked since childhood and built a reputation in film and television. But in 2001, Robert Blake's name would no longer be associated with Hollywood roles. Instead, it became tied to one of the most controversial and closely watched criminal cases in recent memory. Robert Blake was born Michael James Gubitosi in New Jersey in 1933. His parents moved him into show business early, and by the time he was a child, he was appearing in the Our Gang comedy shorts under his birth name. As he transitioned into adulthood, he took the stage name Robert Blake and worked steadily in television and film. His role in Cold Blood in 1967 earned him critical praise, and in the late 1970s, he starred in the television series Beretta, playing an undercover detective. For decades, his work provided him respect in the industry, even if off-screen he was known for a guarded and intense personality. His personal life, however, took a dramatic turn in the early 2000s when he became involved with Bonnie Lee Bakley. Bakley had a history of multiple marriages and lawsuits, and had reportedly pursued several celebrities before becoming involved with Blake. In 2000, she gave birth to a daughter, and DNA testing confirmed Blake was the father. Blake married her later that year, though those close to him described the relationship as strained and distrustful from the beginning. On the night of May 4th, 2001, Blake and Bakley had dinner at an Italian restaurant in Studio City, California. After leaving the restaurant, they walked to Blake's car, which was parked nearby. Blake later claimed he had forgotten a handgun he carried for protection and returned to the restaurant to retrieve it. According to his account, while he was gone, Bakley remained in the passenger seat of the vehicle. When Blake returned to the car, he said he found Bonnie Lee Bakley injured from a gunshot. Emergency responders arrived, but she was pronounced dead soon after. Investigators immediately questioned the bizarre timing of Blake leaving her alone in the car and his claim of returning to the restaurant to get a weapon. The gun he retrieved was not the one used in the incident. As detectives combed through the case, they uncovered allegations that Blake had attempted to hire someone to harm Bakley in the past. Former associates claimed he had approached them looking for help in getting rid of her. Investigators also learned that Blake had been unhappy in the marriage and had reportedly spoken negatively about her to friends. After nearly a year of investigation, Blake was arrested in April 2002 and charged with killing Bakley. Prosecutors argued that he arranged the act to rid himself of a relationship he regretted. The defense countered that the case lacked physical evidence directly tying him to the crime. The weapon used was never definitively linked to him, and there were no eyewitnesses placing him in the car at the exact moment of the incident. The trial began in late 2004 and drew significant media attention. Witnesses testified about the turbulent relationship and about Blake allegedly soliciting others to carry out the act before the night in question. The defense attacked the credibility of these witnesses, emphasizing inconsistencies in their stories and lack of direct proof. They portrayed Bakley as someone who had manipulated Blake financially and emotionally. In March 2005, the jury returned a surprise verdict. Robert Blake was found not guilty of killing Bonnie Lee Bakley. He was also acquitted of one count of solicitation, while a second solicitation charge was dismissed. The not guilty verdict stunned many observers, but the prosecution's case had been largely circumstantial. With no forensic evidence tying him to the weapon or the exact moment of the shooting, the doubt was enough to prevent conviction. However, the legal battles were not over. Later that year, Backley's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit in civil court. Civil cases require a lower standard of proof, and in November 2005, a jury found Blake liable for her death. He was ordered to pay $30 million in damages, a sum that would increase with interest and legal expenses. Financially, it devastated him. He filed for bankruptcy soon after. After the trials, Blake's acting career was effectively over. He gave occasional interviews, but largely withdrew from public life. He lived modestly, far removed from the wealth he once possessed. In later years, he maintained his innocence and expressed bitterness about the legal process, but the civil judgment remained in place. On March 9, 2023, Robert Blake died in Los Angeles at the age of 89. His passing reignited public debate over whether justice had truly been served. Those who believed in his guilt pointed to the civil verdict and the testimony from associates. Others insisted the criminal court made the only decision it could, given the lack of direct evidence. Imagine someone who built a career over 7 decades, beginning as a child and ending as a respected television star, ultimately remembered not for the characters he played, but for an evening outside a restaurant and the courtroom battles that followed. His story raises questions about perception, proof, and the line between suspicion and certainty. In the end, his name lives in 2 separate realities, one shaped by fame and another by doubt, tragedy, and a courtroom that could not fully settle the truth. Number 9. Tom Sizemore. He was once a familiar face in major Hollywood films, an actor known for gritty roles, intensity on screen, and collaborations with top directors. But as his career climbed, his personal life began a long fall into addiction, violence, and repeated criminal convictions that ultimately defined his public identity more than any film credit ever could. Tom Sizemore was born in Detroit in 1961 and grew up in a blue-collar family. He studied theater in college and moved to New York to pursue acting. His talent and raw presence earned him early roles in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but his breakthrough came with films like Heat, Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down, and Natural Born Killers. Directors admired his intensity, and he built a reputation as someone who could embody troubled, volatile characters with startling realism. But behind the scenes, the life he was living began to resemble the chaos of the roles he played. Drug use escalated over time, and by the mid-1990s, he was struggling with addiction to substances that affected his work, relationships, and judgment. Friends and industry insiders described him as talented but unpredictable. While some actors experienced occasional legal trouble, Sizemore's downward spiral became a recurring pattern of arrests, courtroom appearances, and attempts at recovery that didn't hold. One of the most prominent incidents occurred in the early 2000s when he was charged with assault involving his then-partner. In 2003, he was convicted of domestic violence after a highly publicized trial. The court found that he had physically harmed his partner during their relationship. He was sentenced to probation, ordered to attend counseling, and given restrictions intended to address both his behavior and substance abuse. Probation did not stop his pattern of destructive choices. Over the next several years, he faced multiple arrests related to drug possession. In 2005, he was caught attempting to use a device to falsify a drug test, which violated the terms of his probation. He was sentenced to jail time and ordered into another rehabilitation program. Even after his release, he continued cycling through arrests tied to substance use. In 2007, He was arrested again for possession and for violating probation terms. Courts offered him chances at treatment rather than lengthy incarceration, hoping he might overcome his addiction. Each time, he publicly spoke about wanting to change, but relapses followed. Interviews and television appearances showed a man caught between acknowledging his responsibility and struggling to control his actions. Legal trouble wasn't limited to drugs and physical violence. He was involved in cases where he was accused of stalking and harassment, and he faced civil suits from past partners. His reputation in Hollywood suffered dramatically. Roles disappeared, agents kept their distance, and his professional credibility fell away. Even when he landed minor parts, they were overshadowed by the latest headline about his arrest or court hearing. In 2010, Sizemore appeared on a reality show focused on addiction and recovery. The program documented his attempts to achieve sobriety and hinted at the depth of his turmoil, but the effects were temporary. His criminal record reflected repeated failures to comply with court orders, missed treatment sessions, and parole violations. Over time, his body of work was buried under the consequences of his personal life. While he continued to appear in smaller projects and independent films, his legacy shifted from his acting career to a cautionary example of self-destruction. He was arrested several more times throughout the 2000s for possession and probation violations. In later years, he spoke openly about his addictions and legal history, acknowledging that he had caused harm, lost opportunities, and damaged his own career. Though there were periods where he claimed to be sober, the shadow of his convictions and repeated offenses never left him. The combination of violent behavior and drug use meant that, in the public eye, his life became defined by the damage he caused rather than the performances he once gave. Tom Sizemore died in March 2023 after suffering a brain aneurysm. He was 61 years old. By the time of his death, discussions about his life rarely focused solely on his acting talent. Instead, they included the long list of convictions, arrests, and ruined relationships that followed him for decades. Imagine someone who once shared the screen with Academy Award winners, worked with legendary directors, and stood on sets of blockbuster films, only to be remembered as much for courtrooms and probation hearings as for movie roles. His story illustrates how fame can't protect someone from their own decisions and how repeated harm to others leaves a permanent mark. In the end, the legacy of Tom Sizemore is one of talent overshadowed by violence, addiction, and criminal behavior. What he built on screen was undone by the choices he made off it, leaving behind a life that serves less as a tribute and more as a warning. Number 10. Lane Garrison. He was a rising young actor with a breakout television role and a promising career, but one reckless night changed everything. Lane Garrison went from Hollywood success to prison time, and the events that led to his conviction became a defining moment that followed him for years afterward. Lane Edward Garrison was born in 1980 in Dallas, Texas. His early life was reportedly unstable, and he moved out as a teenager, spending time living with the family of a friend, actor Jessica Simpson. Seeking a career in entertainment, he moved to Los Angeles in his early 20s and began working small jobs while auditioning for roles. After a series of minor parts, his breakthrough arrived in 2005 when he was cast as David Tweener Opolskis on the hit television series Prison Break. The show brought him quick recognition, and his character, a petty thief with a nervous edge, became part of the ensemble that carried the series through its first 2 seasons. At just 26 years old, Garrison appeared to be on an upward trajectory. He had industry connections, steady income, and opportunities ahead. But late in 2006, his life veered in a direction that would end his freedom and his standing in Hollywood. On December 2, 2006, Garrison attended a gathering with a group of teenagers in Beverly Hills. Over the course of the evening, alcohol was consumed, and at one point, he decided to drive several of them to a convenience store. Inside the car were two 15-year-old girls and a 17-year-old boy named Vahan Setian. Garrison, who was 26 at the time, had been drinking. In the early hours of December 3rd, while driving them back, he lost control of the vehicle and collided with a tree. The impact was severe. Vahan Setian, seated in the passenger seat, suffered fatal injuries and died shortly after. The two girls and Garrison himself were also injured. Investigators arrived at the scene and conducted an inquiry. Toxicology tests confirmed that Garrison was over the legal alcohol limit. In addition to intoxication, prosecutors later argued that speed and poor judgment contributed to the crash. The incident deeply affected not only the families involved, but also the entertainment community that had recently watched him rise. In March 2007, formal charges were filed. Lane Garrison was charged with vehicular manslaughter, driving under the influence, and providing alcohol to minors. He cooperated with authorities and expressed remorse publicly and in court. The case drew media attention due to his fame from Prison Break and the age of the victim. In October 2007, Garrison pleaded guilty to all charges. During sentencing, he addressed the victim's family and acknowledged responsibility. The court weighed his cooperation and his lack of prior criminal history against the seriousness of the incident. In November 2007, he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in state prison. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the victim's family and complete counseling and educational programs. Garrison entered the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation System and served time at various facilities. While incarcerated, he participated in substance abuse programs and reportedly engaged in self-reflection. He was released in April 2009 after serving approximately half of his sentence, factoring in good behavior and prison credits. After his release, he attempted to rebuild his life and career. He returned to acting in minor roles in independent productions, but the shadow of the incident followed him permanently. Public perception had shifted from a rising actor to a cautionary story of responsibility and consequence. In later interviews, he spoke about the guilt he carried and the pain caused to the Setian family, acknowledging that no amount of remorse could reverse what happened. Legal issues resurfaced briefly in 2012, when he was arrested for a domestic-related incident involving a girlfriend, but those charges were later reduced. He was sentenced to probation and counseling, and the case did not result in additional prison time. Still, the headline reinforced how his image remained linked to trouble. Despite occasional work in film and television, he never regained the momentum he once had. Projects were smaller, appearances were limited, and he often spoke about sobriety and the importance of making better choices. Unlike some celebrities who disappear completely, he continued trying to work, but his name always carried the weight of that night in 2006. Imagine being young, successful, and at the height of a career, then making one catastrophic decision that ends someone's life and changes your own forever. The crash that killed the Vahan Setian was not a mystery, nor was it an act driven by intent. It was the result of alcohol, poor judgment, and a moment where responsibility was abandoned. Today, Lane Garrison's life remains shaped by what happened in that car. He served his sentence, expressed remorse, and lives with the knowledge that his actions took another person's future away. The case endures not because of speculation or unresolved questions, but because it stands as a stark reminder. One night can rewrite everything, no matter who you are or how brightly your career once burned.